This is TV Podcast Industries with the second part of our Penny Dreadful Rewatch of Season 1. We're talking about episodes 5 to 8. Welcome back, fellow Penny Faithful. This is TV Podcast Industries, and we're watching Penny Dreadful. This is part 2, where we're talking about Season 1, episodes 5 to 8. I'm one of your hosts, Derek.
Hello there, Penny Faithful. I am one of your other hosts, John.
Welcome back on our rewatch of Penny Dreadful.
Yes, another fantastic and mesmerizing second half to Penny Dreadful. I think certainly for me, there were things that I actually liked more in this rewatch. I think the first time I watched Penny Dreadful, I always thought that the second half of this season was actually slightly weaker than the first half.
Right.
Weirdly, whether that was just because it delved more into just the relationships of Malcolm, Vanessa, and Mina and their families. I'm not too sure, but this time around, for sure, I think it absolutely is as good and holds up with the first parter that we looked at there recently. Yeah. So this was really good for me.
Absolutely. Just a reminder, the way that we're looking at these episodes, we're going to be releasing each episode individually on our Patreon feed over at patreon.com/TV Podcast Industries. Then these big ones, these 4 or 5 episodes that we're talking about, we're releasing them on our main feed at tvpodcastindustries.com. We're going to be talking about all of the episodes from season 1 to season 3. That's a total of 27 episodes. I'm going to have all of those out on our feeds by the time the 4th season of Penny Dreadful City of Angels, is released at the end of April. Now, there's not supposed to be much connection between this series of Penny Dreadful and the new series. In fact, there is an actor that appears playing a different character in the new series, and he was originally in the first series. Rory Kinnear is coming back for Penny Dreadful City of Angels, but playing a different character, we understand. So there's probably not going to be a huge amount of connections between these 3 seasons, but I suppose hopefully the vibe of the show will carry on, as it's the same producers and the same people behind the show, with John Logan, who was the showrunner for this show, also writing and creating the second show, Penny Dreadful City of Angels. So that's what we're hoping for, is kind of get the vibe of these first 3 seasons, so we can take that on with us into the next show.
Absolutely. I mean, certainly the mythical horror folklore kind of element of this looks like it will feed through as well. I think with City of Angels taking on a more Mexican, North American folklore, rather than that folklore being written about for the new industrial and mechanized and scientific age by those Victorian novelists such as Bram Stoker, Mary Shelley, and Oscar Wilde. So this will be, I think, certainly the hub of it moving through into then Penny Dreadful City of Angels.
Exactly. And as you probably know, if you've been listening to our previous 4 episodes, these are much shorter episodes than our main ones. Usually, we do talk sometimes a little longer than we expect. So we're going to jump straight into our discussion of episode 5, Closer Than Sisters. This episode was directed by Coky Giedroyc, and it was written by showrunner John Logan, as have all the episodes been so far. John, do you want to tell us the synopsis for this episode?
Sure. Vanessa recalls her close friendship with Mina Harker. She remembers when Sir Malcolm returned from one of his many trips to Africa and regaled them with tales of cannibals and the like. One night after dinner, while playing in the maze, Vanessa saw her mother and Sir Malcolm making love. It was a changing point in her life. On the night before Mina's marriage to Captain Branson, she seduces him, leading to a cancelled wedding and the end of their friendship when Mina catches them in the act. Vanessa undergoes a lengthy period of madness and a horrific period in the insane asylum. An encounter with her enemy leads to the death of her mother and a visit from Mina, who desperately needs her help.
All about Vanessa this episode. Definitely. And I do remember watching this the first time. It's a weird one. I'm not a big fan of period dramas. There's a lot of them that used to be on the BBC, which were translated from Victorian era novels, that kind of stuff that were on the BBC. And I remember when this episode first aired, it was filmed in Ireland, as we've mentioned before. There's a lot of filming that went on in Ireland. It was filmed in a place I've probably been to hundreds of times, the beach that Vanessa and Mina meet on. We've been there quite a lot of times. And it just felt so standard costume drama at the beginning of the episode. So unfortunately, at the time when it was released, I wasn't hugely captivated by this particular episode. Now looking back, and I think you mentioned it earlier on, John, now looking back on this episode, it's so formative and so important that you have an episode focusing on how Vanessa, this mysterious of all mysterious characters in the show, how she became what she is, I suppose. So I think at the time, because it was on TV and there were ad breaks in it and all that kind of stuff, I think I probably watched about 15 minutes of it and went, maybe this episode isn't the greatest of episodes. But now looking back on it, there's so much interesting stuff happened.
Definitely. And I think it's not just Vanessa and Mina, it's the Ives family and it's the Murray family and everything around that. You know, there's a really nice moment, where, Vanessa talks about the gates of our two houses were always open until they weren't. Mm-hmm. You know, there is a rupture that occurs between these two families that their children play together, their parents socialize together, and there is a rupture here. And I think that's really, really interesting. And I like how this flashback, in a sense, starts with the writing of letters of Vanessa to Mina. Mm-hmm. You know, my dearest Mina, my darling friend. And it closes with, her sealing up the letter and putting it into a trunk with a whole range of other letters as well. You know, this flashback is as a written letter from Vanessa to Mina, which the letters are never posted. Yeah. And I found that really, really nicely done, as well as it starts on the beach and ends on the beach. You know, at the beginning, it's these children along, you know, Vanessa, Mina, as well as Peter, running along the beach, carefree, fancy free in that sense. And then by the end, it is Vanessa, after her period of madness and illness, as the doctors believe, walking along that beach, being visited by an image of Mina, who is then kind of dragged away from her subconsciousness. Yeah. So there's some nice bookends to this episode, which is ultimately a flashback episode. Yeah. And I really, really enjoyed just how the flashback was told as a written letter, which for that time, that was the main form of communication.
Absolutely. And I like the framing of it as well, where she's opening the letter with Mina saying to her, I used to write these letters once a month to you, then maybe once a week, and now I'm writing them almost every day. There will come a time where I'm just writing letters over and over again, getting out my mind onto paper effectively. So, and the point that she doesn't send them is kind of saying, even though these are supposed to be letters to Mina apologizing to her, they're actually just more for Vanessa to get out all of the things she wants to say to her best friend, effectively. But the way we've been talking about these episodes is picking a big moment from each of the episodes to talk about them, because there's so much that goes on in this show. We want to make sure that we discuss the big things that happened in each episode. So there's little things we're not going to talk about. But John, do you want to give us the big thing that stood out to you about episode 5 from the show?
Yes, I will begin it with a quote. I whispered and something listened, says Vanessa. It is the madness of Vanessa. This is what her family, this is what the established medical community believe at this time, that she is descending into madness, that she is sent to an insane asylum for treatments and so on. I love that the medical practice at that time is that this is a mental illness with a physical manifestation. But ultimately, as we move through this episode, we realize that there is a curse to Vanessa, that she's not simply having a breakdown because of these complex interactions that we've seen throughout this flashback between her and Mina, between her viewing Sir Malcolm and her wife in the throes of passion within the maze. It is that she is cursed. She has, in various acts, have whispered and has let something in. Something has listened to her and has effectively possessed her here. This is a foretelling, effectively, of what we see in episode 7. But it plays out as an illness, as a mental illness, within this episode. And I really, really enjoyed that contrast between what the outside is seeing of her and what she is then experiencing. I think that's a really good aspect to this.
Yeah, absolutely. It seems like Vanessa's power is to kind of open the door between our world and the afterlife in some senses, or whatever way you'd like to describe it. She's praying to God for forgiveness for something, but God's not listening anymore, but somebody else is kind of the way it's played. She's kind of opening the gateway to a spirit world and letting in something else to possess her, is what seems to happen earlier on in this episode. So I think that's a really interesting way to play it. You know, they're trying to kind of talk about the religious aspects of Vanessa. We see her praying many times throughout this series, but it seems like her fervent prayer is so powerful that it's opening the gateway.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it's what's the trigger point here? Is it her sexual act with Mina's husband to be, Captain Branson, in the conservatory, or, you know, the moment where she kind of faints effectively or blacks out is when that door, that gate between the two houses of Ives and Murray is shut in her face by Sir Malcolm after everything has come to light, that Captain Branson has been sent off because he was effectively having sex with Vanessa, and Mina caught them. So I really found the intensity of it all fascinating for a flashback. And ultimately what we get after she's come out of the mental asylum, which, quick little sidestep onto that, the Banning Clinic, I just thought was beautifully shot. The starkness of the tiles, the whiteness, everything about it really does play to your notion of what a insane or mental asylum is. You know, people doing unspeakable things in a sense to a human being out of medical practice. And of the time we have that hydrotherapy where she's effectively hosed down. Yeah. Which certainly I could use that sort of to wake up in the morning.
After her ice bath, and then the hose being shot at her full blast.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, like I was surprised that arm didn't fly off with the power of that hose. Like,
definitely, and then you get this lobotomy where they drill into her skull. Yeah. I think if I remember rightly, so certainly back then, the medical notion was that they needed to relieve pressure from the brain as well, and that's why they were that was part of the reason why they did it. Yeah. But ultimately, we get this first sense of a deeper, more sinister curse or possession when, and I really enjoy this, when Vanessa starts to recount, I suppose, the past questionable exploits of the doctor who is consulting with her and with her family, Dr. Matthew Benning, where she starts talking about his past exploits in Africa. It seems like that was a fairly questionable time, probably doing untold kind of nastiness to the local inhabitants. And this is where, he immediately sort of gets her into the different treatments that are so brutal. And you kind of then question his medical judgment. Is this to effectively shut her up because she is privy somehow to his sort of hidden past through this possession? Yeah. And this moves through back to her home with her mother, and you really then are left with no doubt when you think she's being visited by Sir Malcolm Murray, and then you get those dark demonic pupils that come in. He isn't as he appears to be. And it's not Malcolm, I think she quotes him as the serpent. I think Timothy Dalton is absolutely excellent here. He's talking about the sight beyond this world, that she is drawn to the deep ocean, the dark whisper, and that yes, darkness was spoken, and Vanessa listened to it.
Yeah.
He gives a nice reference to Keats's Ode to the Nightingale, which effectively is about rejecting optimism, and it explores the transience and mortality of death, the experiences of death. So, it's very much about death, depression, all these negative elements about human existence leading to mortality, which is really interesting. What I read was that this idea of negative capability, where you actually, to achieve an artistic high and to progress the artistic nature of the work that you're doing. So this was for Keats. You forget about the philosophical coherence of what it is that you're talking about. Right. So it can seem improbable or illogical. Yeah. And in a sense, that's what they're saying about Vanessa.
It's happening to her.
That's happening to her as well. Yeah. She's going into this negative space, and no one outside can understand what she's doing, but there is some kind of, she's touched by something, and she can't control it in that sense.
Yeah. It's a really interesting one, isn't it? Because at the time, the things that are visited upon her, I suppose, at the Benning Clinic, they're things that would have been done if you felt that a pressure on the brain was causing a problem with your patient, effectively. So I'm not sure whether Matthew Benning is putting her through these individual things because of what she says about him. He believes that the things she says about him come from her feeling that she's possessed. So she's going through the standard medical practices, but they are barbaric to our modern eyes. What's happening to her, they're absolutely barbaric. And it gives that whole sense that this is like an episode of American Horror Story in a way.
Yeah, definitely.
One episode. That it's that feeling that she has absolutely no control over what's happening to her. She's being passed from room to room by these people in the Benning Clinic, giving her all of these treatments that they would give her, but she's a believer in the spiritual, and the occult has possessed her effectively. So they're not willing to accept that as any kind of explanation that this is happening. They just believe it's a pressure on her brain. So they're going through all of these processes. What I love is the end result of the whole thing, because it hasn't cured her of anything, because they're not treating what's actually happening to her. She is possessed here. You can't treat possession with these medical practices. What the end result of it is, her mother comes in and sees her absolutely being possessed and dies on the spot because she's seeing something that is absolutely impossible happening in front of her eyes. So that's the death of her mother. I love how that plays out, because there's nothing that her mother could have done. Her mother is very good to her. She's trying to go through all the proper channels to solve this problem that she sees in her daughter. But the one thing she didn't possibly envisage was what's happening to her is a possession, and it needs to be dealt with by maybe an exorcism or by something within the occult that might have sorted this out for her daughter. But there's no option that her mother would ever have sought that, and it ends in her death.
Yeah, I mean, it's really shocking, that moment where, is she writhing because she's being possessed? Or I immediately felt, because it precedes Malcolm Murray there, and realizing that he is this dark creature that is about to possess her, that it's a sexual element, and so that there is, a lot of ghost effing effectively going on here, which effectively shocks her mother to death in that sense.
Yeah, potentially.
But certainly, yes, everything leads to Vanessa's mother dying. And again, it's another point of contention here within her own family, but also with the Murrays.
Yeah. Like, it's so sad, she's left alone once again by, it seems like her father is very standoffish about everything that's going on. It's her mother that takes her to the doctor. It's her mother that wants to hear all of the information the doctor has, because she's the one trying to save her. Her father doesn't seem to be very present at all in these situations, in these discussions at all. He's downstairs asleep, isn't he, after having too many drinks, while her mother comes upstairs to visit her and leads Peter into the house. Everything that's being done is through her mother. So when she dies, surely that's a massive loss for Vanessa again, another very sad moment for her. My major point for the episode is probably the other side of it, just because they deal with the early relationships of all of these characters that you've kind of heard about a lot. You've heard about Mina multiple times, and you've only seen her in this present, I suppose, where she's been captured by the master and with the vampires. So seeing the three of them as young kids, Mina, Vanessa and Peter, you mentioned the walk on the beach at the start where they're all quite innocent, but it even opens with that idea where Vanessa's going, I think we should hop in the ocean and swim as far as we can possibly go. And Mina being scared about that. Mina, not as adventurous as Vanessa.
Yeah.
And as well, we see Peter's also not as adventurous as Vanessa. So it kind of harkens to that idea that Vanessa is the daughter that Malcolm should have had. She's not just the daughter Malcolm should have had. She's the child that Malcolm should have had. She's more adventurous than Peter, and she's more conscious of the world than Mina.
Yeah.
And she also has this dark side to her, which is what Malcolm deserves for all the horrible things he's done in the world. That's how he meant it as well. So she has all three of those pieces all together.
No, I think that kind of element really comes out in the infidelity of Malcolm with Mrs. Eves in the maze as well. And then it's reflected with Vanessa having that infidelity of sorts with Mina's husband to be, because they're getting married the day after, but Mina catches them, and that links part of this notion that Vanessa is a daughter that he deserved as well, because they are in effect doing the same thing. As you say, Malcolm's darkness is hidden away by the fact that he does this abroad.
Yeah.
Whatever that may be to local, to the local indigenous people where he's exploring, whereas Vanessa's is internal in a sense.
But isn't Vanessa trying to punish Mina for finding someone almost? She's found a kind of perfect life that's laid out in front of her, and Vanessa's kind of hasn't gotten there, and she tries to approach Peter to go to that life that they're supposed to have together, but Peter's having none of it. So is it just her trying to punish Mina because Mina seems to be going down this perfect path because there's a darkness in Vanessa?
Yeah, I think there's an element of that. I mean, I think the great thing about this concept of the gate between the two houses and it being bookended by letters is that between all of this, what we really get is a massively complicated relationship between all these people, and in particular between Vanessa and Mina, where, yes, they are best friends, but at the same time, in my notes, I kind of put, there's an envy. She's jealous of Mina for getting the captain, in a sense, and about to get married, and her advances to Peter, she tries to kiss him and he kind of recoils away, and Peter's seen as weak. Yeah, Mina, who as well, Vanessa may think of as weak compared to her, has gotten this, very sure of himself captain in the British Army. And so there is a jealousy, there's an envy, as well as that they love one another, and there is a best friendship there between them. It's so kind of complicated, and these things actually happen. And that's one of the things I loved about this, is that all those things can be true at the same time. And it doesn't mean that they're not friends. It's very, very complicated. And so, yes, I would definitely agree with you there as well. I think with Mrs. Ives and Malcolm, and then what happens with Captain Branson, that's just, again, another indicator of this kind of reflection of Malcolm and Vanessa Ives, which I think is just really, really well written. It's so good.
It is, absolutely. And we should absolutely mention here as well, it's a bit of a light touch in the show, and it's one of the things I don't really like about the show, but it's a standard at the time. There is a read on this that Vanessa is in love with Mina, and she's not jealous that Mina has found the perfect life for herself, that Vanessa's jealous about being left behind by the woman that she loves, effectively. It's also read into this as well that Peter is spurning the advances of Vanessa because he's gay as well, and you're supposed to read that in as the audience. It's one of the things that I've never really enjoyed on TV over the last 10 years, is where the audience has to make up their own mind whether the character is a gay character or a lesbian character. They put out these ideas, and you can make your choice as to whether Vanessa is just jealous of the fact that Mina's going to be living in this perfect future exactly as she planned. Captain Branson is a man with a mustache exactly as she wanted when she was 13 years old. That's who she's going to get married to. Is Vanessa jealous just because she has the perfect life and Vanessa doesn't think that she's going to get that? Or is Vanessa jealous because she's in love with Mina and feels that that's the end of that relationship? The name of the episode is Closer Than Sisters. You know, was it supposed to mean that these two were supposed to be partners or not? And it's left open for you in shows like this. Over the last 10 years, we're finally getting shows where you do have characters who are absolutely lesbian characters in love with friends, and those actual discussions are happening. But at this time, it feels like it's just left open. There's that other read of it that potentially the reason why Peter is so weak, as described by Vanessa, and why he spurns her advances is because Peter's gay. I don't like that it's just left open to the audience all the time. It always seems to happen in these shows. It's mentioned about the fact that when Peter goes off with his father, he's a weak boy trying to prove to his father that he's good enough for him. And the read on that could be that Peter's gay, but it's just not on screen.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's in there. But back to my main point from the episode, the piece I feel is used so well to show the differences between each of these three characters, between Mina and Vanessa and Peter, is they're dealing with taxidermy. All three of them are involved in taxidermy, something that none of us practice now. We have TV and video games now instead. But I like that, you know, it's described that Mina deals with the basic. Mina deals with just the normal stuff, stuffing squirrels and normal things that are going on around the garden. Peter is constantly critical of his own work, regardless of Vanessa saying that it's really good work. He keeps feeling that he's not as good as making things feel alive or not as good at what you're supposed to accomplish. He's trying to judge himself against how everybody else does taxidermy. Whereas you see from Vanessa, she does it as an art form. She wants to make sure they look as alive as possible. That beautiful, and I'm not a big fan of taxidermy, but that beautiful stuffed eagle that she has, that in flight, in motion, where she's put some mirrors behind the eyes to give it that alive feeling. But also, it's kind of a form of magic to her. She says, you must give it a name, because only when something is given a name can it be alive. So that is her basic form of magic as well. So all three of these characters are quite exemplified, I suppose, within this taxidermy analogy being used in all of them. So I think that's quite interesting. And I do like that Vanessa uses that to put down Mina before she sleeps with her future husband, Captain Branson. She kind of says she just deals in the basic, here's my stuff kind of thing. So I like that. And just one other thing on the taxidermy and the mirrors in the eyes, you know, that the phrase, the eyes are the mirror of one's soul. It's interesting that Vanessa's putting mirrors inside the eyes of these creatures to make them look alive, because then it's reflecting you back into yourself when you're looking in the eyes. So is she seeing their life inside these stuffed birds as her own life inside of herself? Yeah. You know, it's a fascinating kind of piece. If you're doing a flashback and putting in all of these pieces you said earlier on, it makes it feel so alive and so vibrant. This flashback feels so urgent. And that's because it's so well detailed, I suppose.
Yeah, definitely.
Those are the main points on episode 5. Any other notes that you have on the episode, John?
The only one I have is Gladys Murray, Sir Malcolm's wife, and it kind of comes to the point of the relationship between Mina, Vanessa, and Peter, but it's the relationship of Malcolm with, you know, his wife. Very formal relationship, almost as though he's not happy to be back from his travels. You know, Peter is absolutely enthusiastic for his dad returning, but you know, because his son seemingly wants to be an explorer to please his dad, but it seems as though Malcolm is distant with him. Yeah. And his most loving hug and connection on return from Africa back to his home is with his daughter Mina and Vanessa, where he hugs them together as one. Yeah. So again, really interesting in terms of that idea of these are his two daughters, yeah, and which is the one that he deserves, Mina or Vanessa. And
I like to point out that it's almost an equal hug between the two of them. You know, it doesn't seem to treat them as a separate entity almost. Peter comes along to him and is like really excited to see him home, and he kind of says, "Hi, son, there you go, there's your gift," and then walks off and gives a hug to both girls. And it feels like he doesn't really care about Peter. I don't think he even looks at Peter for the rest of that scene. If I remember rightly, he is talking to the young girls, giving them a hug, and then sees his wife come into the room. And as she cries, as he arrives home, cries with joy, I presume, that he's back and safe and sound and not lost a leg in Africa this time, and he just goes, we'll have none of that. Stop it, kind of thing, to his wife. He doesn't care at all about her feelings. That's not the way we have a relationship.
Yeah. And it's a formal peck on her cheek. Yet, a few moments later, after the big welcome home meal with his neighbours from the Ives household, he's in the maze having a bit of nookie, hot sexual nookie with Vanessa's mother.
Exactly. One other thing I just wanted to comment on in here, I know it sounds weird, but the de-aging of Timothy Dalton in this episode. And I didn't notice it for the first 4 episodes, but he's looked older in the 4 episodes than I think of Timothy Dalton in the first 4 episodes. And in the 5th episode here, as it's supposed to be, 20 years beforehand, he genuinely looks the way I expect Timothy Dalton to look. So I don't know whether they aged him up for the first 4 episodes and then cut his hair differently and dyed a bit more of the grey out for the 5th episode.
And he had a tan as well.
And he had a bit of a tan. But I don't know whether it's just that they did or whether they've done a really good job and some kind of CGI on him or some kind of work with makeup work to make him look younger. But he generally looks more vibrant and younger in the 5th episode than he did in the other 4, if that makes sense. I just thought it was an interesting touch that they did. Also want to call out Vanessa's mother, Mrs. Ive, played by Anna Chancellor. The reason why I want to call her out is because she played Frances Gaunt on Pennyworth, which we talked about last year. Does she only go for shows with Penny in it? Is that the way it goes?
Maybe.
But she's a great actress. Really like seeing her on screen. And I do think her scenes with Vanessa and her death scene, I suppose, are quite integral to the story. So really good to have a great actress in there like Anna Chancellor.
Yeah, it was great to see her in this episode. Good to see her around the table feasting in the maze, and then ultimately dining out to death after seeing her daughter in a very uncompromising position on the bed with a ghost, effectively, that she couldn't see. Yeah. No wonder she died.
Exactly. That's it for our episode 5 discussion. If you want to send any thoughts about Penny Dreadful, make sure you send in Penny for your thoughts to feedback at TV Podcast Industries. We'd love to hear any thoughts that you have on Penny Dreadful. We know there's 27 episodes to go, and we know you may not get through them as quickly as we're getting through them, but we'd love to hear your thoughts about Penny Dreadful. We'll take a little break, and we'll be back with our episode 6 discussion after this message from Into the Night, the Moon Knight podcast.
Hi, I'm one of the High Priests of Khonshu Ray, and I have the sacred privilege of providing you, the loony listener, with a podcast honouring Marvel's very own Moon Knight. So join me and a host of others at Into the Night, a Moon Knight podcast. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram, or support the show by becoming a Patreon member. Into the Night, a Moon Knight podcast. It's time to get your Khonshu on.
Welcome back, fellow Penny faithful. This is Derek, one of your hosts of TV Podcast Industries. We're talking about episode 6 of Penny Dreadful, What Death Can Join Together.
Hello there, fellow Penny faithful. I am one of your other hosts, John. Yes, what a great line that was from Victor Frankenstein as well. What life divides, only death can join together. Really kind of nice twist on the normal marriage rights that are normally given about what love can join together.
Yeah, only death can tear apart. Yeah,
yes.
Quite interesting idea, isn't it? Let's get into our discussion about episode 6 of Penny Dreadful. As we mentioned before, what we're doing is talking about our major point, our major moment from each of the episodes as we go through all 27 episodes of Penny Dreadful before the release of Penny Dreadful City of Angels. Once again, this episode was directed by Coky Giedroyc and written by showrunner John Logan. John, do you want to give us a summary of this episode?
Sure. Vanessa senses Mina's whereabouts to be on a ship in the port of London. So Malcolm scans the shipping news for any clues, and he, Sembene, and Ethan head for the docks. They locate a ship that sailed from Egypt several months ago, but has been quarantined since its arrival. The hold is filled with vampires, and also Mina, who is taken away before she can be rescued. Meanwhile, Dorian Gray invites Vanessa on an adventure, and they later have dinner together. While having sex, Vanessa is possessed by her evil spirit. Elsewhere, Victor Frankenstein completes the autopsy on Fenton and finds nothing unexpected. However, Professor Van Helsing tells him of the existence of vampires. While Brona's health continues to deteriorate, she tells Ethan she regrets her behavior towards him the previous evening at the Grand Guignol. It's very difficult to say Guignol.
I know.
Guignol. It's a bit like the director, Coky Giedroyc. Giedroyc is spelled very differently than I would have thought. And I keep thinking of, let's do the hokey cokey every time you say his name. But he is delivering some great direction here.
I was told when we started podcasting, 6 years ago at this stage, I was always told that just speak with confidence. If you don't know a name, speak with confidence and you should be able to pass through it. Just don't point out when you know you've said something wrong. So thanks, John. I'm hoping I've pronounced his name correctly in the last 2 episodes.
I think so.
John, do you want to give us your big moment from episode 6? This was a pretty big episode, really.
It was, and it was really difficult to kind of think what I should pull out here. But I've taken Professor Van Helsing that we've already seen earlier in the series, where he's talking about the blood condition. He's the consultant hematologist, but he has a more intimate discussion here with Victor Frankenstein, and he talks about that Malcolm Murray doesn't know what he is hunting, yet he does quite intimately. And he talks about his knowledge of vampires. And I think one of the things that really was nice here was the link to a Penny Dreadful called Varney the Vampire by James Malcolm Rymer. And he says, whilst this was folklore, it did capture the truth, that there were vampires out there. He also talks about his intimate knowledge of vampires. We heard of Hannah's wink previously, the technique that he used to determine the vampire blood effectively.
Yes, named after his wife, wasn't it?
Named after his wife, where then he matter-of-factly tells Victor that he drove a stake through her heart and cut off her head because she had been turned. She had been turned by this creature that Sir Malcolm is hunting, and really has very little knowledge of what it's about, its background. So I thought this was really nicely done.
Absolutely. And another interesting character for Penny Dreadful, as we mentioned before, along with Victor Frankenstein and Dorian Gray, you know, another character from fiction that's being brought into these stories on Penny Dreadful. Someone that comes along with their own added pressure, I suppose, of who they are. It's interesting that we're seeing Van Helsing towards the end of his life here. So he's already gone through all of his adventures going around the world trying to kill vampires or trying to hunt down Dracula, effectively, which is where he's from. But he's already gone through all of those adventures, and he's getting to the end of his life, meeting this young guy in Victor Frankenstein and telling him, I used to be obsessed with my work, so much so that I was able to kill my wife when she was turned. I was able to drive a stake through her heart and cut off her head, even though I loved her more than life itself. But he's imparting that wisdom to Victor to not fall into his work so much. And I don't think he understands how much his work will affect Van Helsing, but he's telling him not to fall into his work so much that he is not following on the dreams and love that he should be able to follow on as a young man, because Van Helsing is effectively saying here, I wasted a lot of my life doing all of these things on my own when I could have spent more time with the woman he loved. So I think that's a really important conversation that they have. And because the character comes along with that pressure of being a major character in Dracula as a novel, I think it's quite a shocking exit from the show that we have, right? Definitely.
I mean, I think, you know, just before we go on to that shocking exit, it is the, you know, the parallel lives of Victor and Van Helsing, you know, this obsession with the work. And I really like that intimate moment, as you say, where Van Helsing is kind of cautioning him against being too obsessed, where everything else is blotted out from Victor's life.
Yeah.
I think the other interesting thing is James Malcolm Rymer with Varney the Vampire. I don't know whether this Penny Dreadful was used or maybe partly an inspiration to Bram Stoker, but effectively that this came before Bram Stoker's Dracula. So that there is this element here where Bram Stoker took a a Penny Dreadful, this, I suppose, slashy, horror sort of throwaway, very digestible throwaway, and added this lore around it, in Dracula. But I like the fact as well that in a sense, Van Helsing's kind of phrase that, whilst it was folklore, it still captured the truth, that in a sense, Bram Stoker tried to put a truth around the notion that these creatures exist within his novel.
Yeah.
And I thought that was really nicely done.
Yeah, the Penny Dreadfuls themselves were serialized stories coming out every week in newspapers, or even their own short form published. I think we mentioned it before, that they were like the comic books of their day, where they were coming out every week, which led me to make the connection instantly. I don't know whether you remember this movie as well as I do. I'm sure you do, John, of course. The Lost Boys.
Yes.
Great film. But the Frog Brothers in The Lost Boys, who own the comic book shop, when Sam comes to the town and his brother Michael, they come to the town for the first time and they discover there's vampires in the area. He goes into the comic shop to buy himself a Superman #1, and the Frog Brothers there going, no, these are the comics you need to read. These are your survival manuals. And they give him Tomb of Dracula. They give him some of the other horror comic books to explain what's going on in the town. So this moment with Van Helsing bringing Victor in and showing him some of the Penny Dreadfuls, that could be his survival manual to this outbreak of vampires in London. It really did remind me of that scene in The Lost Boys, which I know may not have been the inspiration for the scene for John Logan, because it's a bit more of a popular movie than he's used to, but I like that there's a little parallel between the two, and it does feel very similar, doesn't it? It's that idea that somebody has tapped into the fact that there is in existence these supernatural beings, but they're using it for entertainment. Yeah. But if you know how to read it, you actually may be able to use this as your survival manual. Yeah,
absolutely. I think what's really interesting as well is that, when Van Helsing is asking Victor, do you know the term vampire? And he says these creatures know the limits and go beyond the limits of life and death, which is effectively what Victor Frankenstein is doing with others. There's that synergy between what Van Helsing is talking about within this creature, a vampire, and what Victor is doing through science and through different means in terms of bringing people alive and making their life longer and more infinite in a sense. I thought that was really good.
Absolutely. And I'm not sure if we're clear there that the Penny Dreadful that was in the TV show Varney the Vampire is a true Penny Dreadful. It was released at the time, written by James Malcolm Rymer. He also wrote a Penny Dreadful called The String of Pearls, which introduced the world to a very famous British folklore character of Sweeney Todd. He appeared in the pages of this Penny Dreadful. It's attributed to James Michael Rymer. It's such a long time ago that these attributions get mixed up a lot, but he's supposed to have been the one that wrote The String of Pearls featuring Sweeney Todd, who's gone on to become such a famous character, the barber of Fleet Street, killing all the people and cooking them up in pies, was in a Penny Dreadful that somebody would have been reading on a weekly basis, running down to their local shop to find out how that story completed, and it became a massively famous character in film and TV over the years.
And music, and musicals.
And musicals, yes.
Yeah. Moving to Van Helsing's ultimate demise, I found this a real shock, and I suppose I have to be honest here, a real shame. But Caliban effectively pulls Van Helsing down a side passage whilst him and Victor are having a continued conversation about, what they're doing, and about vampires, about Hannah, about their lives. And Caliban pulls him aside and in front of Victor, snaps his neck.
It's crazy,
And you're kind of thinking, I would have loved to have seen more of Van Helsing, because this was a real nice, juicy, kind of intimate moment between Victor and Van Helsing. But ultimately, Caliban here is sending a message to Victor to stop allowing what he thinks as his distractions from his goal to provide Caliban with his bride, with his mate, and lover, effectively. So I thought this was just completely unexpected, completely shocking.
And David Warner's such a good character actor as well.
Absolutely.
We've seen him in so many TV shows and so many movies as well that you just don't expect him to go out like that. He's mid-sentence and just banged over the head, dragged down the street, and his neck's broken without any further to do about it. And Caliban throws him to the ground and says, and that's what's going to happen to everybody you love, everybody you talk to that isn't involved in creating this bride for me. To kind of circle back on the episode itself, this is the episode where Caliban has been watching Maud, the actress from the play. He's been treated very nicely by her, and he feels there's something kind of relationship between the two of them building up. He feels maybe I don't need a bride built for me because this woman seems to like me. And then he finds out that she has a fiance and she's kind of cruelly joking about him behind his back. There's no way that I'm in love with anybody else other than you, kind of thing, as he's watching on. So Caliban is massively angry here about his lot in life once again. It's an interesting characters, and we talked about with Ray when we were talking about our earlier episodes, that Caliban is a character that you absolutely sympathize with or empathize with, and then it comes to this point where you're looking at Victor with his only friend that could actually help him out.
Absolutely.
Someone that might actually put him on a better path than he's been on with Van Helsing. Maybe if the two of them work together, it may not be as horrible a life for Victor as it seems to be turning out like. But Caliban just interrupts the whole situation and snaps the neck of Van Helsing, ending that friendship straight there.
Yeah, absolutely. But Derek, what is your big moment for episode 6?
I think the battle on the plague ship with Sembene, Malcolm and Ethan is kind of a big moment.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's not just because it's a fight sequence or anything like that. It's also because I love the moment where Ethan arrives to join these other two that he hasn't really signed up with. Remember, he didn't make the pact with Malcolm that everybody else made. He made the pact that he would work with Vanessa, whatever she said would go, but Vanessa's off on her date with Dorian. So he's come along with these other two to go on the attack on this plague ship. One thing I always find interesting with these scenes, because they're high action scenes, right? So they're directed as action scenes. But one thing I really like about this is Ethan doesn't really know what Mina looks like. And within a couple of seconds of anybody with blonde hair attacking him, he just shoots them in the head with his amazing gunslinger skills. And there is moments where you're kind of going, well, they look at all the bodies afterwards and go, oh, no, Ethan killed Mina the minute he arrived and took her out. Luckily, she's wearing a white dress every time we see her, not the black outfit of the rest of them. But I do like the scene. I think Sembene comes across as such a great warrior in here as he takes out his two curved blades.
They are awesomely cool.
So cool.
Yeah.
So cool. And he just takes out everybody around him and saves Ethan and Malcolm on multiple occasions through this. I think if he wasn't there, we see that Malcolm would have been killed by the overhead beam that burns and falls down in between himself and Mina and the Master as she's taken away. So I think it's a really good dynamic scene, but I do like it shows the relationship between all these characters. You know, I feel like Sembene is going along with Malcolm to these excursions or these expeditions to save Malcolm's life and do what Malcolm couldn't do. We hear from Malcolm early on in the episode that he would be willing to sacrifice Vanessa just to save his daughter, and he'd do anything to save his daughter. But Sembene is the one that questions, but what happens if if she can't be saved? And Malcolm's response is, no, but that's what happens. If I get her back, then she will be saved. And Sembene going, we both obviously come from two very different places. I understand when there are points when someone can't be saved and I'm willing to do what you can't do, kind of thing. Yeah. So this whole series really there's that point of realization for Malcolm, isn't it? That potentially he may have to accept that his daughter can't be saved at some point, and what does he do?
Yeah, I love Sembene. I think that frank discussion with Malcolm, and it's repeated throughout the second half of Penny Dreadful as well, between Malcolm and Vanessa, but also Vanessa in her own letters to Mina, about that love will hold them back from doing what is absolutely necessary, which is to kill. And it's always that Malcolm would never be able to do that to his own daughter, Mina, and it would require either Sembene or Vanessa to do that. I think Vanessa says that in episode 5, where she goes, I love you enough to kill you. And she believes that Malcolm doesn't have that. Sembene thinks that, Malcolm will never see the lost cause in his own daughter.
Yeah.
So that's really nice. I love the fight, for sure. And I was thinking there's so much guns being fired off. How do they know that it's Mina or not? I was also kind of intrigued that guns are working on the brides of Dracula, in that I always thought it would have to be, the stake through the heart, or the exposure to sunlight, right, or the cross being held up. But here, I think matter-of-factly, guns work on them, and that's it.
But John, that's just folklore. It did capture the truth, some of the truth, but a gun through the head, that'll sort you out.
Exactly.
But I'm not sure whether all of those brides of Dracula, all those servants of the vampire, I'm not sure whether all of those are dead. I think it does knock some of them out. A lot of times they tend to get swarmed quite a lot.
They do.
Our three main characters tend to get swarmed quite a few times here, but I'm not sure whether it's brand new ones over and over again or whether the others are getting knocked down and coming back. It's not really put on screen for us that they're actually killing them there until the end, I suppose, towards the end as the fire is raging, and we see the master escaping with his bride, I suppose his proper bride, in Mina. I think at the end it's only the two of them that are getting out of this plague ship as the fire is raging on.
That definitely. It's just one of those things where you kind of go, "Oh, the guns are working." But I think you're right that it doesn't necessarily work first time, and you definitely get that swarming element from the nest.
Because in the same way, all of these main characters with Sembene, Malcolm and Ethan have all been jumped on by one of these vampires. They are thrashing at their necks and that kind of stuff. In other media, it would only take a moment with a vampire at your neck to be killed or be turned into a vampire, right? So, depending on what you're watching, whereas in these ones, they are attacked, they are knocked to the floor, they have got those teeth thrashing at them, but none of them have been bitten by the end of the episode, right? None of them have been bitten by the end of the fight. There's no question over any of them being bitten or that any kind of damage being caused to them. So that's quite interesting as well.
Yeah, for sure. I think two final things from me on this point is one of them I had in notes actually, but I like the fact that they're on a ship in the port of London. In Bram Stoker's book on Count Dracula, he comes to London by ship.
That's right.
In a coffin filled with the earth of his homeland. And so this idea that this is the master having come to London from, well, Egypt in this case is the suggestion, or from Transylvania or, the Eastern Europe, in the coffin of his own soil, is the soil of his homeland. I think is a nice little nod to that. And also I just really like the animalistic nature and look of the vampire. It's very unrefined compared to, I suppose, a number of Dracula adaptations. He's not seen as this suave, human formed, person. This is someone who looks ancient and uncomplicated and raw in nature.
Right.
And I find that fascinating. I really like it as well. I like the fact that these are distinct from humans and actually are in hiding. So I find that interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, it is one of those things that's added as a layer, isn't it, of fear, that not only are they supernatural beings that can tear your throat out and kill you, in some stories, they can pass for human as well. So that adds that extra layer of, I just passed a man in the street. Well, maybe he could be a vampire because he's hidden underneath that the vampire part of him is hidden, But in this case, you're right. These people couldn't be walking down the street. None of them could walk down the street in the middle of the day or at nighttime and pass for a human. That's not what happens. They are attacking, and they're like a nest of evil creatures that are just picking off their victims as they go. They're not trying to pass for human. They are completely different. So,
yes.
Really interesting in this, seeing this much, I suppose, of the vampires in the episode. But that was my big point for episode 6. Any notes on the episode that we haven't discussed, John?
Just for me, I loved Caliban's face through the grill as he's looking into Maud's dressing room, the actress. It's very cool, very spooky, and it's because he's given her a book, Paradise Lost by Milton, that, it's an epic poem around the fall of man, the temptation of Adam and Eve, but also the fall of Lucifer to become Satan. And we have that kind of interesting exchange where Maud gives Caliban an orange, is kind of in there, and talks about her brother who had an accident and scarred him as well, and his name was Lucifer. They call him Luke. So Caliban gives this book to Maud. So I thought that was a kind of a nice little moment. Again, Caliban's fall as a man into this new form, this monster, the demon, as he's been called previously. Sort of those kind of parallels there as well. So yeah, I thought that was a nice little spooky moment. It kind of almost reminded me of Scream with the white mask. His complexion was so pale behind the grill. The grill is so dark that you just sense that he was wearing almost like a Phantom of the Opera mask, and that kind of thing actually might be more appropriate than the Scream mask.
Although I was thinking Michael Myers, like I was thinking of those types of horrors. Yeah, definitely. That kind of stalking creature behind the grill. We didn't mention him in this episode because it's going to be more important in episode 7, but the moments between Dorian and Vanessa where they have sex and she eventually gets possessed by her demon again, I think it's a really interesting scene. It's a fascinating scene where we see the two of them interacting with each other and see how close they are in personality, I suppose, or how similar they are in their view of the world. I like that Dorian's kind of seeing her as someone that's an equal to him. A lot of the time he sees her perspective on life as being quite equal to him. But I also like that Vanessa calls him out about the paintings in his house, about them all being portraits. There's no landscapes, there's no animals. It's all portraits around him. Interestingly, in the last week since we recorded part 1 of Penny Dreadful, I read the book, The Portrait of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. I just had to, after being so repulsed, I suppose, by the character of Dorian Gray on the show, I wondered whether Oscar Wilde had a different perspective on the character. And not really. He is an a-hole in the book as well. He's just a very young a-hole who other people seem to perceive as being a really nice person until he ruins their life. So that's kind of the way it goes throughout the book. Like he gets his comeuppance as you always would in these types of books, but it's a really good read. Actually, I'll highly recommend it to you, John, to have a read of that. But I kind of like how they've translated this character into the show. He's a little bit less punished by the world than Dorian Gray kind of is in the book. We have this guy who's kind of floating through life, getting everything he wants, but he wants more and more and more, and he's ravenous for more and more and more. So getting someone like Vanessa for Dorian would be a massive prize, I suppose. And what happens here is she changes. She has the possession by the demon. I love that moment when they're having sex where she throws him, gets on top, and we just hear the voice of the demon through her going, oh, what games we will now play. You know, it's almost that Hellraiser moment, you know? Yeah,
it's like she's opened a channel or she's let her guard down.
Absolutely.
And that's allowed the Dark One to come in.
Exactly. And do you know what it reminded me of?
Go on.
Another one, Angelus returning on Buffy the Vampire Slayer, where we had Angel and Buffy going through this typical teenage kind of romance, and then they finally have sex, and what happens? He has that one perfect moment of happiness, and Angelus, the evil vampire, suddenly appears back into his life, taking over the lovely Angel who's been so protective of Buffy. He's now completely changed because he had that one true moment of happiness. And it almost feels like that's the same thing that's happened to Vanessa here. She's met her match. She's met someone that she could possibly spend some time with. And the two of them have a great intimate relationship. And the minute it happens, the demon rears its ugly head behind her saying, now we can play some games. Now I'm going to possess you again. I just think it's a really good twist. You know, I know a reference to Buffy. Buffy is seen by some people as being just a standard teenagers TV show, but it had some true moments of great horror in there. But there's nothing more horrific, I think, in that show than having Buffy falling in love with a character and then that character having that moment of happiness and turning into the monster again. So I think there's a nice parallel between those two.
Yeah, definitely.
That's it for our points on episode 6, is it?
It certainly is.
Excellent. We'll take a break and we'll be back with our discussion on episode 7, Possession. Hi, this is Derek from TV Podcast Industries. We hope you're keeping safe and well at this time, and hopefully we're providing a little bit of entertainment to get you through some of the boredom that comes along with what's been going on at the moment. If you've been enjoying the podcast, we'd love if you subscribe to us at tvpodcastindustries.com, or you can support us by going over to patreon.com/tvpodcastindustries. You can also support us by leaving a review on your podcast catcher of choice, or of course, you can share the podcast with any of your friends, because sharing the podcast is sharing the love. Remember, we've covered many, many shows over all the years that we've been podcasting. We've covered things like Gotham, The Boys on Amazon Prime. We've covered Pennyworth, Daredevil, Jessica Jones, Agent Carter, Luke Cage, Iron Fist. So if you've enjoyed the covers that you've been listening to, hopefully you'll check out some of the other shows that we've done. And we've got lots more to come. And thank you, as always, so much for listening. This is TV Podcast Industries. We're back with episode 7 of Penny Dreadful. Our discussion about the first season of the show is continuing with episode 7, Possession. I'm one of your hosts, Derek.
Hello there, fellow Darklings. I am one of your other hosts, John.
Oh, that's pretty good. I like Darklings.
Yes. Well, I thought it was kind of cutely affectionate as the creature that has possessed Vanessa talks to her about my Darkling, my cute little Darkling. Very affectionate for an evil Lucifer-esque type creature.
Mm-hmm. And this is a massive episode of the show. It's another big Vanessa episode for the show. Let's get into our discussion about it though, John. The episode is directed by James Hawes. He directs this episode and episode 8, the finale of season 1 of Penny Dreadful. And he's back for 3 episodes in season 2 of Penny Dreadful as well. He also directed 2 excellent episodes of Black Mirror. He did Smithereens and Hated in the Nation, 2 really, really good episodes of that excellent show. So definitely a person who loves the darkness in humans.
Absolutely.
Once again, written by John Logan as well. John, do you want to tell us the synopsis for this episode?
Sure. Although I'm a little scared.
Mm-hmm.
Vanessa returns from her outing with Dorian Gray, possessed by her evil spirit. The evil inside her clearly knows more about Sir Malcolm than most. She is seemingly normal the next day, but remembers nothing of what happened. Frankenstein examines her and she transforms before his eyes. He believes she is suffering from some sort of psychosexual break, but Sir Malcolm believes she is simply possessed by the devil. They do their best to make her comfortable, and she is sedated most of the time. Sir Malcolm may have ulterior motives, however, for so desperately wanting to keep Vanessa alive.
It does tell you something about the show that Sir Malcolm believes she is simply possessed by the devil. That's all. You know, we didn't mention at the end of episode 6, but that moment when she arrives home after having sex with Dorian and getting possessed by the demon of love, she walks in through the door and Malcolm just goes, "I have something to tell you. I haven't been completely honest with you," and then looks around at her disheveled visage as she walks through the door, and then she just suddenly raises from the floor and starts spinning. You know, it's that moment where you go, oh, okay, this is not the way I expected this conversation to go.
Exactly. It's floating Vanessa, which is frightening.
Yes, definitely. John, do you want to give us your big point for this episode? I think you've taken the big point of the episode, really.
It is the big point of the episode, and dare I say it, it is the episode as well. It is the possession of Vanessa in all its forms throughout this episode. I mean, just to begin with, this whole episode is so powerful, disturbing, and utterly convincing. For some reason, it's not something that registered after I watched this the first time when I first watched Penny Dreadful, that of how good this episode is and the performance of Eva Green. But just on this rewatch, I mean, I do have to say it is as good, and dare I say it, if not better, arguably, than the Seance episode. Because it is consistent throughout the entire episode. This degradation and haunting of Eva Green, who is, quite frankly, a force of acting in this episode. She is phenomenal. I don't think I've quite seen anything like this before, ever. Whether it's on film or TV, it is committed from beginning to end.
Absolutely.
And I would suspect that those people, including, you know, Timothy Dalton and these very well experienced actors, all of them, could but not only be caught up in all of this, because the performances of everyone is, quite frankly, amazing. So, you know, I have to say that because it's a tour de force, quite frankly.
As I said, I don't think we're going to have 2 big points from this episode, so I'll jump in and just say that my note about this was Eva Green is so unself-conscious in how she's acting. You know, you can imagine the kind of meeting with John Logan and him going through, this is all the things you've got to do in this episode. And, you know, some other actors might kind of go, oh no, but that's too much to push myself through for an episode. But it feels like Eva Green is really putting herself through all of these moments. She is completely uncompromising in what she's saying, in how she's acting. That moment where she's speaking in tongues, where she starts talking in American and then Northern Irish and then English and then in Arabic she's saying, please kill me. You know, those moments as she translates through all of those different voices as she's speaking to everybody around her is fascinating, like absolutely brilliant to watch, and really terrifying, as you said, John. A really scary episode when you feel like she's genuinely possessed, I suppose, in some moments. I think it's a really, really good episode.
Absolutely. I mean, it really is that moment where you do feel that she has recovered. She's sort of lounging on the sofa in the drawing room. There's a cup of tea next to her. She seems relatively at peace, and then Malcolm is speaking to her, and then the possession takes on the form of Mina, where she talks about her fat mother, distraught that her husband was not there. Tell me more of all the women that you have had sex with on your exploration. You know, the whores in Zanzibar, you know, all the people that Sir Malcolm has gone through, so to speak, on his way around Africa, from the Maasai through to Burundi. You know, this is Mina calling out Sir Malcolm as to who he is, you know, and you get this great sequence then where the study becomes trashed as books are flying off the shelves, and, you know, it's just really, really frightening.
Yeah, absolutely. And as we mentioned in the last episode, you know, this moment that's happening to Vanessa can't be explained away like it could be in the last episode, where people would say, oh, this is just a manifestation of some mental trauma that's going on. Whereas in this episode, there's nothing that can explain it other than it being a supernatural experience. I do love the description when asked by Malcolm, is it Mina? Are you possessing Vanessa? And she goes, somewhat. It's somewhat me, but it's also going to be the demon that's possessing Vanessa. We get the description as well that Mina's saying that her father forced Peter to have sex with all of these women as well as he was going through.
Yes.
And that was to alleviate Malcolm's disdain for himself, I suppose, but also to make Peter prove himself to be the man that Malcolm wanted him to be. Peter didn't want to do it, but he would of course do it if that's what he's asked to by his father. But it's almost like, well, if I'm going to do this and cheat on my wife, my son's going to do it as well, so I can placate my own mind and believe that I've done something that's okay to do. Kind of thing. So,
and it is this speaking in tongues to the rest of this company. Ethan Chandler has a great line where he says, you wake up and you get feisty every now and then in one of the lulls of this possession, which is really interesting. But she makes her way through Victor, as well as through Ethan, all the way through. She is exposing some of their inner secrets to the rest of the group. You know, she pulls out that Victor is a virgin. He likes cleanliness, and she calls back this quote, you know, let not life divide what death can join together, as we discussed in the last episode. And that's where Victor's kind of, what is going on here has to leave. You know, it's a callback to the less intense possession, I suppose, to some extent, that we saw in episode 5, which was just towards the end of that episode. So this is a repeat of everything that's gone. In this sense, that all the way through, there's the talk of having an exorcism, that it's beyond the medical knowledge and requirements that Victor can bring to Vanessa's health.
Absolutely.
That it requires a spiritual intervention through a priest and through an exorcism, which it is the moment where Sir Malcolm is reticent to do that, and there is this whole thing throughout that Ethan is suspicious of Malcolm's motives, and you get towards the end Victor and Ethan talking about why is it that he wants her to live, and Ethan is kind of, he's not sure that he does, that and you see the duplicitousness of Malcolm when in the moment of her weakness, he sees her effectively as a telephone to be able to connect into Mina to find out where she is. That he really becomes very, very unsympathetic here in that moment.
Well, you hear her pleading with him, saying, "Don't make me do this. Don't make me go back in there and find her." You know, it's such an interesting episode for that, where again you're supposed to be on the side of this father that's lost his daughter, but he's putting Vanessa through all of this abuse effectively at the hands of the demon, you know, to try and use her as a telephone. I like that. I like that description, Sam. It's really interesting, isn't it? And I think the true indication that every time she's possessed is that she knows something that she couldn't possibly know except for the demon. You know, as you say, John, she quotes the exact phrase that Victor had said to Vincent Van Helsing when they were alone. She quotes exactly the line that Victor said to Vincent in the last episode, where he said he was obsessed by this Shelley poem.
Yes.
So there's no way she could have known that at all. And you see the realization cross over Victor's mind when he hears her say that this is not going the way I expected it to go at all. You know, I'm not able to just give her a couple of leeches or give her a couple of aspirin and tell her to call me in the morning, you know. That's it. But yeah, these moments as Malcolm is trying to keep her alive when everybody is giving up on her almost. They're not giving up. They're going to comply with her wishes and allow her to die. And Ethan's going to be the one to do it. But Malcolm is standing in the way because he wants her for different reasons.
Yeah, I mean, there's that moment where, in a brief period of respite during this time where he's trying to get Vanessa to connect with Mina, and she's in this halfway house, this demi-monde, where she goes, "You are a cruel man." And again, it's just, Malcolm, it comes across really badly here.
Yeah.
But again, there's a really nice explanation of this half world, this between, I suppose, heaven and hell, this demi-monde that it is brought out in the conversation between Ethan and Victor, where they talk about the pacifying of the Native American tribes, and that the first thing they do is take the children, and they remove their culture. They cut their hair, they take the spiritual prayer bags, they remove them from the tribe, and then they're given a good Christian name and are taken to a family away from the tribe. And what they find is that they know they don't fit in that world, so come back to the tribe. But then they're not accepted either by the Native Americans. And so they no longer fit in either world. And that's how he describes the situation with Vanessa.
Yeah.
She is possessed in this world between two different worlds, and she doesn't belong in either of them, either in the dead or in the living. She is possessed within this halfway house.
Yeah, I think even Ethan calls it unwelcome is the term that he used to describe it. Not just unwanted, unwelcome back in the place that they would consider their home. You know, Victor and Ethan have had that discussion that Malcolm and herself seem to have a close relationship, but actually when you scratch the surface of the relationship, he's completely using her to get his daughter back and not actually welcoming her back into his home, which is, you know, something that we saw from the flashbacks effectively, is that she came with the information from Mina to his home, and he allowed her to come in and stay because he can now use her for what he wants from her. So absolutely such great moments between these characters as well. And that description of the Native American children being taken away from their tribe is such a sad story, I suppose, such a sad piece of history. It's something that happened to the natives in Australia as well. Exactly the same thing, the stolen children from the Aboriginals in Australia. It's such a sad part of all of our histories, really, that is coming across in the show. Yeah. And it's just interesting to make reference to it. I suppose as well, this is also something about Ethan's history that we still don't know about what's happened with him in America and why he's on the run, I suppose, in the UK. We know that he's on the run, but we don't know anything about his history. But these little moments, connecting him back into the folklore of Americana, which we will see as the series progresses. It's just interesting touches that's where he's coming from. That's his point of view on the native tribes, in America.
Yeah, it's really good. But, and of course, when Ethan Chandler arrives, again, this speaking in tongues, she talks about his evening with Dorian Gray, the irresistible boy of our dreams. You know, did you have sex with him, or did he have sex with you? You know, we should tell Brona. And again, bits of the dark creature come, racing out. Leave her, you imbeciles. Leave her to me. You men. It's just really great. And then the rug gets completely pulled from under your feet when you have this kind of fairly intimate moment when Ethan Chandler is looking in on Vanessa.
Yeah.
It's the moment where he says, you wake up every so often and get feisty every now and then.
Yeah.
You know, he's the one that's caring for her, seems the most worried about her physically and personally, certainly compared to Malcolm. And then you realize that it is this dark creature again in the form of Ethan Chandler.
This is the point that I was going to talk about. Actually, I have to say, we'll give all of the praise to Eva Green for her scenes in this. And we've said how great Timothy Dalton is in the series overall, you know, and Harry Treadaway has been fantastic in his role. But these moments with Josh Hartnett in this scene with Vanessa, where he's playing the two sides, where he's playing this really evil demon, telling her exactly what he wants. He wants her to sit by his side as the world burns, where there's no hearts left of humans because they've consumed them all, and then they're going after God. You know, these scenes are totally believable. That's him being possessed. You know, we've mentioned at the beginning of the series, we weren't going to talk about Josh Hartnett's Ethan Chandler very often because he's the point of view character of the audience, which is probably why it's such a shocking moment when he turns and his eyes go black and he is just a vision of the possessed Vanessa. You know, this is the type of thing that's going on in her mind the whole time. When she is being quiet, she's also being abused by this demon at all times as well. You know, so for Josh Hartnett, I think this is one of his best moments in the series. So far.
Well, that's it. You get his vision for Vanessa here. You know, I want you to be the mother of evil. As you say, join me at my side to topple God and to rule over everything.
Yeah.
That's when he says the Darkling as well, my Darkling, which, comes across as quite affectionate for an evil, sort of, or the king of evilness.
Well, he is asking her to marry him.
Yes.
And spend all your time at his side. So he has to be a little bit affectionate towards her. Ethan also gets the cure, I suppose, for Vanessa in this episode. He's the one that saves her. It goes through the last rites from the priest. They'd asked him for an exorcism, and they're told he can't provide that. But we have Ethan using Brona's St. Jude's medal to save the lost cause that is Vanessa. And I think that's a really interesting one. You know, I'm a Catholic by birth. You know, I know a lot about Christianity from growing up in the church and all that kind of stuff. And I always love when movies use relics that I've seen day by day as a Catholic growing up, and they use them to these supernatural effects. You know, things like Indiana Jones using the chalice of God as a resurrection tool, or as a tool to keep someone living forever. You know, those kind of stories, I've always really liked them. So seeing something as day to day as the St. Jude's medal, which is something that people use when they feel their life isn't going very well. They'll wear a St. Jude's medal, pray to St. Jude, and they'll look for his guidance, more so than God almost, saying, you know, you're the patron saint of lost causes, and I feel like I'm a lost cause. Can you protect me and help me through my day? And here we have Ethan using it to save Vanessa from a possession from the devil, you know, effectively. Yeah. So he's putting it on her head and saying in Spanish, St. Jude, save her. So I really like that that's how they've used this religious symbol, I suppose.
Yeah. It is just intense. Mm-hmm. Everything, about this. Like, just before the priest is called, there's a moment where her possession is taking a very physical form, where her veins are starting to go black. There seems like a tattoo is forming on her chest, but she's scratching at her arms and digging into the walls, and the screaming, and you're just like going, oh my goodness, just, it's really disturbing. And then the priest comes, and you just know she wasn't bound properly to that bed. I vaguely remembered that something happened to the priest, but I still was there was a little jump there as she bites into his cheek.
Well, she was bound. The demon has given her the super strength to break the bonds that have tied her to the bed. That's the thing. And I think that's the scary moment, isn't it? Because you think she's been stuck there. She's been tied to the bed for days on end, not gotten up and walked around effectively. And you have this moment where it's revealed to the priest what's in that room, and you see him and how terrified he is, just giving the last rites. And then she jumps up and bites the cheek off him, basically.
Yeah. But I mean, she goes absolutely bonkers and bananas and, dare I say, apeshit here. To be honest, that is the room that will have its windows replaced more than any other room in the Murray household. Fenton already broke one, but all the windows are smashed in. I think you see Victor being kind of flung down the corridor.
Every one of them. Yeah.
Every one of them is gone except for Ethan. And you have that tense standoff before Brona's St. Jude medal is used by him on Vanessa, where he has the gun to her head. And again, it's kind of almost linking to this idea of, you know, do you care enough to shoot them? Because she's almost pleading at this stage for him to take her out of her misery. Yeah. She only believes that it is the bullet left, not that there is this, St. Jude's medal. And I thought that was just really kind of tense and really nice. I think even the build up as well, because the priest is called Matthew, and she has this moment where, she goes, I knew a Matthew once, and again, linking back to episode 5 with Dr. Matthew Banning at the insane asylum. And in this case, the priest is about to use holy water on her, and she goes, he, i.e. Dr. Matthew Banning, he tortured me once with water, with the hydrotherapy, and now you're about to do it with holy water. And then all of a sudden, this moment where she goes, the other Matthew, the tax collector, where the biblical reference, where going back into the ancient world of the Middle East and the nascent beginnings of Christianity, and Matthew, the tax collector, and that's when the priest is like looking at her going, what? And then she goes for his cheek. And then the thing that really spooks the priest is when she refers to another Matthew, the tax collector, i.e. one of the apostles of Jesus, and the biblical testament from the Gospel of Matthew about the tax collector and his death in Hierapolis. And that's where you see, you know, just before she bites a chunk out of his cheek, the priest going, what is going on here? That's where you realize it is the ancient evil within her speaking, but it is just, it's so engaging. I mean, I was just completely transfixed on the whole of this episode, in terms of the intensity of it. Even where, you know, Vanessa is kind of subdued or sedated and she is quiet, there's an intensity around all the other characters as they're sort of waiting, because it is agreed that they will be there until she is cured or dead, effectively, as Malcolm says. And this brings up these conversations around why is Malcolm wanting to keep her alive. And obviously he does what he does while she is in that vulnerable state. So Ethan catches him, and ultimately that's what prompts get the priest, you know, stop messing around. Victor thinks it's a lost cause, hence the St. Jude medal. But, you know, she is dying effectively. So it is really, all on a massive knife edge.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do like that thing about the death of St. Matthew. It feels once again like she's tapping into something she shouldn't know about how Matthew died. the demon is saying through her that he crucified Matthew upside down so he could see the hell that he was going to after he died. I think that's what scares the priest as much as it does. It's effectively saying that one of the people that you think is a saint ended off in hell because of my taunting and how I killed him, effectively.
Yeah.
So it's such a brutal scene for the priest who's just walked into this room and seen this woman tied up to a bed and these three men going, give her the last rites or give her an exorcism. And he doesn't believe in an exorcism. That's the whole point. He doesn't believe in the idea that that a demon can be possessing someone, because the Roman Catholic Church has outlawed every type of exorcism. It's one of the things I think we were talking about after we watched the episode, John. I find it fascinating that Nancy Reagan, who played the kid in The Exorcist, was held up as such a great actor for all the things she went through in that movie in the mid-70s. Yet in this episode, and it's only one episode of 8 episodes per season, we see Eva Green doing such a big job of being possessed. And it's one of the best performances I've seen by an actress. There's loads of other touch points in this episode. We probably could talk about this one more than most, but I love Victor talking about the fact that he believes in everything except God. Ethan Chandler saying he doesn't believe in God. And then you have the conversation between Ethan and Sembene, where he's asking Sembene, why is he there? Does he just follow Malcolm round because Malcolm saved his life? And then Sembene goes, well, maybe I saved his life and I'm following to make sure he doesn't die. And then he's asked, does he believe in God? And Sembene says, I believe in everything. So he seems like this wise character who's seen so much happen in the world and seen what's happened to Malcolm and seen what he's been around. And either he's still adventuring with Malcolm, he's still kind of going, well, if I hang around this guy, I'm going to see even more crazy stuff that I'll be able to handle. Or there's something else going on that we'll learn in future. But I do like that conversation between them where, in contrast to both Ethan and Victor saying, I don't believe in God, absolutely, we have Sembene upstairs going, I believe in everything, because nothing I've seen has discounted everything, every possibility.
Absolutely. I think as well, what really contrasts nicely as well with what you've just said at the start of that conversation between Ethan and Sembene is Ethan asks, what's your story? And he just goes, I have none. Mm. And then obviously it's teased out. I think as well, the interesting thing about the priest is that he almost comes across as bureaucratic.
Oh, totally.
No, we can't do this because it's been outlawed. Yeah. So I can administer last rites and the Annunciation and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But it's interesting contrast to a priest in the final part of episode 8 as well, that Vanessa willingly goes in to talk to at the cathedral. But we'll discuss about that, but there's an interesting contrast there, which I think connects these two priests here, but certainly in this instance, completely bureaucratic.
Mm-hmm. And that would be probably the feeling that I would get about the Catholic Church, definitely throughout the 1800s and 1900s. They were very powerful and were much more of a political organization than a religious organization, almost. That would have been the feeling of a lot of people. It would have been, aren't you here to help us and save us and get us closer to God? And they would go, no, those are against the rules of our church, effectively.
Yeah.
It was much more of a punishment society, I suppose. But I do also love, it's a little bit of a trope over the years, but we do have our moment of science versus religion in this episode. We have that moment of Victor just going, do your mumbo jumbo and get the F out of the house, basically.
Yeah.
Where he's just like, whatever, I'm here to help her body. You're here to help her soul, I guess.
Yeah, he says, get out, you ridiculous man,
exactly.
As the priest has said he can't do an exorcism. Yeah. And so Victor is, well, why are you here?
Why are you even here? Exactly.
I think on Ethan, though, as well, I think he believes in the spiritual, mm-hmm. but not necessarily how that forms, in a sense. Yeah. So I think he is slightly different from Victor, who is a total atheist.
Definitely, yeah.
I'm almost going to say anaesthetist, but of course he's probably both as well. Yeah.
We do see him anesthetizing himself in this episode. We see him taking some morphine. And I'm wondering, that moment where he looks out the window and Caliban is standing outside waiting for him to finish this whole thing. Like, I think Caliban knows that the work that Victor's doing for Malcolm is what's giving him the funds to do what he has to do for Caliban, which is why Caliban doesn't just break down the door, snap all their necks and drag Victor out. But that moment where he's outside the window watching in as Victor's looking out, it almost makes the whole scenes in this episode. It almost makes them claustrophobic for Victor, because he's got a possessed woman upstairs who he probably wants to run out the door and down the street.
Yeah.
Even though it's fascinating to him as a scientist, but if he runs out the door and down the street, Caliban's there waiting for him to do an even more monstrous act, effectively. So I like the kind of claustrophobia that creates. I do wonder if it's also a morphine fever dream that he's
Yeah, it
seeing
could be.
Caliban outside, but it's still quite likely that Caliban will be there.
Definitely. I think it could be. I mean, as well, there's a great shot here from the director. It's in the hallway, and it's just the passage of time, because this happens over at least a week, this possession. But it's just a shot of the hallway in Sir Malcolm's house, and the light moving across the hallway, and you just get that changing light and shade as screams are coming from upstairs. And it really gives a sense to the agony that she's in, just from a distant focus, really, of these men waiting downstairs to tie her down, to give her more sedation. I think just one of the final things I want to say about Vanessa here is, despite the degradation, despite the attrition that this possession has had on her, and the thing inside of her that is scratching to get out, as she describes it, is she's still this stoic, strong woman right until the moment where really she is offering up herself to be shot by Ethan. She asks him, "What do you want from me?" And when he tells her, she goes, "But at this moment, my soul is still my own."
Yes.
She goes, "I can't last forever, but my soul is my own today." Like, it's so fiery and like so strong.
Absolutely.
It's just amazing.
And he threatens to kill everybody around her, and she goes, "Well, that's not any concern of mine, because I still have the choice for what I do with my soul." Yeah, it's a massively important moment for her.
It's just really, really good. Wow, what an episode.
Yeah, excellent episode. Any notes on the episode, John, that we haven't spoken about?
I think the only thing are just these kind of father and son type chats between Malcolm and Ethan, and between Malcolm and Victor.
Well, the bromance begins here. Yeah,
it's kind of, it's different angles. So Malcolm trying to get Ethan to come on this holy grail quest for the source of the Nile, and he's talking about again his son. I mean, Ethan says, "I don't need another father," when he asks him to come, but then Malcolm starts to talk about his son Peter dying and being buried on the shores of Lake Tanganyika, and yet then goes, "But I still went on and surveyed the North Shore, but I'm going back to bring Peter's body back." And it's almost Ethan like, well, you say what you need to say to make you feel better. But then with Victor, he just says, "Doctor, I don't have a shred of decency left." We've heard all this horrific stuff that he put Peter through, how he's treating Vanessa, and we get confirmation from, I think, something I noticed in episode 1 or 2, that there is this Murray range in Africa named after him and not his son, and he confirms that. But
I wasn't even thinking of my son when I named it.
Yeah, it is, his decency is completely shredded. He is also a ridiculous man in this sense. So, but I like those kind of interactions. Is it Malcolm trying to make up for Peter being lost, and he sees himself mainly in Ethan, yet with Victor, he's more honest with what he wants to be, or who he is.
And maybe it is well played by Timothy Dalton, because there aren't many moments where he actually expresses regret for what he's done. He kind of talks a little bit dispassionately about it. In moments when other people talking about those things that happened to their child would be much more passionate about it. He says his son was dying and he left him at base camp, and when he came back, his son was dead. But he doesn't seem to go, "If I hadn't left him, or if I'd worked harder, or if I'd run out and got medical supplies for him, maybe I could have saved him." He doesn't have those moments of regret that you would expect. He, in fact, says, his son died because something happened to the medical supplies that he can't even remember, because he was there to climb the mountain. He was there to go on, and Peter couldn't go with him because he was dying at base camp. So off he went on his own, kind of thing. So he is very dispassionate about what happened to his son Peter. As you say, John, even in that moment when he says to Ethan to come with him on the next expedition to Africa, and he says to him that he's going to go there to get his son back. And Ethan says, don't kid yourself. That's not what you're there. You're there to explore again. I know that. I know the type of man you are. So I think it's really interestingly played in there. One of the things that stood out to me in the episode, which I thought was kind of odd, was the conversation between Victor and Malcolm, where Victor's asking, is she sexually active? Because he believes that it's a psychosexual experience. And Malcolm says to him, he doesn't know whether she is or not. And it's none of his business whether she is or not, but he presumes she is. I just thought it was interesting why Malcolm would keep that piece of knowledge to himself, because he absolutely knows that she's sexually active, because that's what broke up the two families. Her having sex with Mina's fiance led to their two families being separated. He has no particular love for Vanessa, or is he trying to hide that he has no love for Vanessa by not breaking that confidence between the two of them? Is that the purpose of him not saying it, or is it just, I don't know, did they just miss it in the writing of the episode, which they don't normally do? They're very specific about how they write these episodes. So I just didn't understand why Malcolm would say he didn't know whether she was a virgin or not. He knows for definite she's had sex at least once, because it was with his daughter's fiance. So, you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
Whether she had sex afterwards or not, he may not know. But I just thought that was an interesting moment that was in there. Also very interesting, because we're going to be talking about it in our episode 8 discussion. But I love the threat from Ethan to Malcolm, because it's a very specific threat when he says to him, if you use her and if you do what I think you're going to do, I'm going to rip your throat out, is the exact threat from Ethan. So an interesting one. And just to mention, I know you kind of talked about the relationships that were going on in the episode, but the little moment of bromance between Ethan and Victor, two characters who've kind of been at loggerheads between the two of them, one thinking the other is very brutish and the other one going that he's very book smart, but not very street smart. And finally we get this moment where Victor needs to learn how to use a gun. So he goes to Ethan for help. And Ethan delightedly shows him how to use the gun, So there is that moment when they're shooting the bottles downstairs, and Victor finally gets a bottle, and then he goes, oh, why don't you show me? I know you want to shoot a gun. And there's the little delighted little moment between the two of them as Sembene comes downstairs and tells them that they're annoying Malcolm upstairs. And you get that little line from going, oh, we've disturbed Dad,
Yeah, absolutely.
Really good little moments. Just, it's good to bring these characters together and have little moments with them, because it's felt at times throughout the series, not a bad criticism or anything like that, but at times in the series, you're wondering why all of these people would be bound together, and you kind of need to have little moments between them to have their own relationships as well, to kind of bind them a little more. So I thought it was important to have those.
I think definitely all these interactions are just so nicely layered in.
Yeah.
And it's really just fantastic. So yeah, I think episode 2 Seance and episode 7 Possession are absolute tour de forces of Eva Green, but also the rest of the cast. It is just amazing what must have been the energy to put into this possession. But I think with that's the end of our episode 7. We'll be back shortly after our break, where we'll talk about episode 8, the season 1 finale, entitled Grand Guignol.
I am Connor from the House of L.
And I am Ray from the House of Zod.
We are two of the many survivors of Krypton's destruction, and we have made our home in Australia, and dare I say have become Australians, for better or worse. But we have also decided to read Superman comics, read Superman books, watch Superman shows, cartoons, movies, basically everything Superman, and from an Australian perspective as well. Whether you're a seasoned fan, like me,
or whether you are coming in fresh, wide-eyed and wanting to learn more like me, then this podcast is for you. Join us for our bi-weekly adventures available on all good podcast catchers.
So just search for Last Sons of Krypton, a Superman podcast. We'll be coming to you from Australia or some cosmic dimension, wherever we are that week.
Up, and away.
Welcome back, fellow Darklings, or fellow Penny Faithfulers. Yes, we are looking at Grand Guignol, which is the season 1 finale, episode 8 of Penny Dreadful, the first series. I am one of your hosts, John.
I'm one of your hosts, Derek. I like how you say first series, because technically it is. Season 1, 2, and 3 make up the first series, and season 4, which is Penny Dreadful City of Angels, is series 2, right?
Yeah.
Is that the way it works?
Kind of.
Always confuses you when you're in the UK and Ireland. We have TV shows that go for 8 episodes and some that go for 5 or 6 series and some that go for 5 or 6 seasons. All that stuff it can be very confusing at times. But we're on to the final episode of season 1 of the excellent Penny Dreadful. I think this series has been great to rewatch, hasn't it?
Definitely. I have seen it in a new light, actually. I think, as I said, episode 7 has just absolutely leapt out at me more than it ever did when I first watched it. And I think a lot of the intricacies have leapt out at me more than they did when I first watched it. So it's been great rewatching.
Definitely.
It's the new watching.
Well, as we get to the end of our season 1 discussions of Penny Dreadful, make sure you stay subscribed to our podcast on tvpodcastindustries.com. And if you're not contributing to us over on Patreon, please go over to patreon.com/tvpodcastindustries.com. The episode reviews that we're doing for Penny Dreadful are being released early over there. You'll get access to our next episode, Season 2, Episode 1, first over there before we release it on our main feed on TV Podcast Industries. But we're getting through all 27 episodes of Penny Dreadful before Penny Dreadful City of Angels comes out at the end of April. So we'd love to have you join us over there. Let's get into the Season 1 finale, Grand Guignol. The episode was once again directed by James Hawes and written by John Logan. John's written all 8 episodes of the show. I keep reminding myself to say his name, that he's the writer of each episode, because so often I forget and then all of a sudden somebody else comes up as a writer for an episode somewhere. So I just want to remind, he did all 8 episodes of this season, right?
He certainly did.
Excellent. John, do you want to give us the synopsis for the final episode of season 1 of Penny Dreadful?
Sure. When Vanessa recovers from her ordeal, she believes she knows where Mina is to be found, the Grand Guignol Theatre, where she saw the play. Sir Malcolm prepares for their visit to the theatre that night by arming himself with a newly designed weapon. They come face to face with the evil they have been searching for all this time. Meanwhile, Brona is on her deathbed and Frankenstein offers to take care of the body. Vanessa tells Dorian Gray there can be nothing between them despite the obvious attraction they have towards one another. Caliban is fired from the theatre and returns to Frankenstein's laboratory, while Ethan's past catches up to him.
And finally, we can talk about who Ethan is in this episode. I feel like for 7 episodes, we've been pretending that we didn't know that Ethan was a werewolf throughout the show. But certainly on the rewatch, there's loads and loads of indicators that he's been the one that's been slaughtering people around town. Maybe last month at the last full moon, and that's why there hasn't been another killing since that time. But yeah, finally, we can talk about it in this episode. Loads of indications of the type of violence that he's subjected on other people, and that he has another darker side that we haven't seen. So nice to get it confirmed in the final episode of this season.
Yes.
And nice to finally be able to talk about it.
Yes, absolutely.
John, do you want to give us your big moment from the final episode?
I think it's ultimately the relationship of Malcolm and Vanessa, and how it moves through to the final battle at the Grand Guignol, where effectively Malcolm makes his choice as well. This relationship has been fraught, brittle, antagonistic, and exploitable. In some cases, you've kind of been wondering whether there's anything there at all between them. Absolutely. And whether it's only that thin thread of Mina. But I suppose the question I asked myself up front is, but is it redeemable? But I think as Vanessa understands where Mina is being hidden at the Grand Guignol, I think she hears this phrase, there will be no happy end, the claw will slash and the tooth will rend. And I think we actually hear that at the end of episode 7.
That's
and
right.
Repeated. Then Malcolm and Vanessa really begin to move towards that, but it's much more frank. I think we get here that Malcolm begins to say that if he cannot save Mina, then he will end her suffering.
Finally, yes.
Yeah, exactly, finally. And we had that in episode 5 as well, with Vanessa saying she is the only one that loves her enough to kill her. So at this moment, Malcolm realizes that he may need to end her suffering, but there's this real frank conversation between the two of them, which is so brutal in his study, where he goes, I'm using you. You are invaluable to me. But if I have to sacrifice you above my daughter, I will do. He will kill Mina to save her from suffering if he can't save her. But if in order to save her, it's to throw Vanessa under the proverbial bus, then he will do it.
Carriage, John.
Or, yes, horse-drawn carriage, then he will do.
Yeah.
So it's the interesting thing is that it's kind of, this is where I'm placed on the board. But as they go, as that company goes to the Guignol, to the theatre, and can I just say, theatres are massively creepy when they're not lit and there's no one in there.
Yeah.
I was just there going, oh no, need a cushion for this one. But
there's definitely a few moments where you just jump. Even a moment where I think Malcolm's walking one way and Vanessa's walking another, and Vanessa comes out of the darkness beside Malcolm, and it's like, oh okay, it's just Vanessa.
Exactly. And this is where the vampire is here with his brides. We get that because we have that lovely moment where the camera pans up after Caliban has effectively been fired by Vincent from the theatre because of events that happen with Maud, the actress. But on leaving, where the camera pans up through the rigging, through all the infrastructure, the sort of the walkways where the riggers are working on, the lighting, the thunderboard, all that right to the top, and you have this vampire sleeping in the rafters of the Grand Guignol.
So cool.
Really, really good. So he's there, and that at some point they are gonna get involved, but they have this really good battle underneath the stage between Sembene, Ethan, and Victor. And again, they're kind of overwhelmed by the brides of vampire, even though they've been firing away. Sembene has a great drop through the trapdoor with his two curved daggers unsheathed. I really, really like that. Yeah. But this battle royal under the stage, which ultimately is only resolved when Malcolm manages to kill the vampire with his needle. But ultimately then it's Mina who comes in and takes over and takes Vanessa hostage, and really says she doesn't want to be saved. My master. And so the question is the vampire that's just been killed by Malcolm, is he the master? Presumably not. Because she's not wilted to the ground like all the rest of the brides underneath the stage. So the suggestion here is very much that this isn't the main vampire. This isn't the Dracula, so to speak, the source of it all.
Always a great rug pull in vampire stories.
It really is, isn't it?
Because she's effectively saying that everything that she's done, where she's created this passageway between herself and Vanessa, and between herself and her father, where she's visited them in their dreams or in their visions and told them what they needed to do to save her. All of those things were her trying to attract Vanessa to her master so that she can be his bride, that she is part of the plan. Effectively, she's gone way beyond the point that she can be saved, because why would she want to be saved? She'll live forever beside her master, who she truly believes in. So it's a great little moment at the end of the series here.
Yeah. And Malcolm in this moment makes his choice. He shoots Mina so that Vanessa can get away, and she's lying there on the stage next to Vanessa where they've both landed. And she goes, "But I'm your daughter," as he's got the gun pointed up, and he goes, "I already have a daughter," and shoots Mina and kills her, not Vanessa. And And I was kind of like, yay, this is really good. Good on you, Malcolm. Whether it's redeemed himself from everything that's gone before, I don't know. But I think there is that moment where he realizes that Mina is lost. And actually, it's not about ending her suffering because she's no longer suffering. It's, as you say, it's gone beyond that. So I kind of really, I'm glad that got all resolved. Just a quick aside, the gun used is a new automatic weapon that Sir Malcolm gets from the gun shop. But in there, we do have a nice little moment where he bumps into Madame Carly, who is actually Evelyn Paul from Brighton, as she calls herself. But
everyone likes a little bit of drama.
Exactly. But ominously for season 2, she does say, I hope we do bump into one another again. And there's a lot of bumping into Evelyn Paul in season 2, which I think everyone will enjoy.
Yes, absolutely. But definitely there's a look on her face as Malcolm leaves that this wasn't a casual bumping into each other that happened. That was an absolutely planned meeting after their last meeting at the seance. She wants to know all about Vanessa or all about Malcolm, one or the other.
Yes.
From their last meeting. So great to see the character back. And, I love that kind of interaction. I always like that, where the veil is pulled back from the last time you saw the character. It's like, no, I'm not Madame Callie. I'm actually just Evelyn Paul. That's just a gig I do on Saturday nights for the rich. I had to make a bit of cash, kind of an interesting one. That is the big moment really from the episode is the battle, because it's all been building to the battle, but everybody gets an ending at the end of the first season. I do wonder when watching this, where they, the way that shows weren't renewed, as quickly as they are now, where you don't get 2 seasons to begin with. I was wondering whether they were trying to kind of give a big cliffhanger for everybody's story at the end of this show, or were they trying to wrap some of them up and give a bit of intrigue as to what might happen? Because everybody does get an ending. That's what kind of my big point from the final episode of season 1. Caliban being thrown out of the theater, you already mentioned, but I love Vincent's final moment with him, where he gives him a truly heartfelt hug. Ray mentioned when we were talking about the first episode of Caliban arriving at the Grand Guignol that Vincent was this character who welcomed him with open arms into the theatre. And they did have a place for him there, and it was a home for Caliban, and that's exactly what Vincent wanted for him. But I love that his final line to Caliban when he's leaving, Vincent says to him, remember us as better than we are, because he wanted this to work. He didn't want to have the actors, for example, attacking Caliban because they don't like the look of him.
Yeah.
He thought this would be a safe place for Caliban to be, and it turned out not to be a safe place for him.
Yeah, I love that moment from Vincent with the hug and just, he's tried everything he can, and he is, he's sad that he's having to say goodbye to Caliban. In fact, he says, I'd prefer to get rid of her than you, but otherwise I am a slave to the public. It is more the actress they want to see on stage in these bloody horror shows. So really nicely done here.
Now, in fairness, I do understand Maud's reasoning for trying to get rid of Caliban. That's
absolutely.
Where he comes in with the orange, similarly to the way that she came into his home effectively with the orange last time. He's trying to do the same to her to show that he cares for her, but he's obviously taken the cues completely differently than how they're meant. And she's alone. She's in this room alone, half dressed, I suppose, as well. He makes reference to the fact that her boyfriend comes in all the time, so why can't he do it? And then she realizes that not only is he getting mixed signals from her, he's also been watching her in her dressing room. So, and then he attacks her effectively. So, all of these reasons are totally understandable as to why Maud would try and get rid of him, because she doesn't feel safe anymore. But it is really sad for Caliban that the only place he's been able to call home he has to go from. Exactly what he says to Victor when he arrives back. I love that the opening line as it cuts into that scene is Victor going, well, you can't stay here. It's like, but you created me, you walked away, and the only place I found that could be a home for myself, they've kicked me out of. So I'll stay for a while. It's not by choice I'm staying, but I'll stay for a while and then I'll get out of your hair,
And it comes back as well, almost to Proteus, this idea that, these monsters, these demons of Proteus and Caliban, actually aren't that.
Yeah.
I think Victor has got the gun to his head. He thinks that Caliban's unaware of it, but Caliban is talking about this futility of his request for a partner, that what he feels and because of his physical look is something that is not going to be reciprocated, and it destroys his soul because of the experience with Maud. And he goes, why did you allow me to feel?
Yeah.
I would rather be the corpse than the man I am.
Yeah.
There's this sense of futility around love because he will never be loved because of how he looks.
Mm-hmm.
And Caliban says, pull the trigger, but Victor has that moment where he pulls back, and rests his hand on his shoulder, and then becomes committed to effectively, getting him his bride of Frankenstein. Yeah. So, you see the sort of reluctant Victor smothering Brona, effectively.
Yeah, exactly. And, remember, the whole central thesis of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein is who's the monster that's created or the one that's created them.
Yeah.
So having these moments with Caliban, having that discussion, why did you make me feel? Yeah, bring me back from the dead. I can be a walking corpse for you if that's what you want, but why did you give me my feelings back? Why did you give me the ability to feel when I can do nothing about it? There's a lovely line for him, and that's why you think there's something between himself and Maud. There's that lovely line from him where he says, happiness is for somebody else. Happiness is for other people. That's not something I'm supposed to feel. I don't expect to live anything of my life in the way other people live it, So a really understandable character in Caliban here. And yes, Victor, effectively reanimating somebody without thinking of any of the consequences is what makes him his own monster in the same way that we talked about Dorian Gray being the monster that he is. Victor is the monster here. You mentioned Brona. It is really sad that we do lose Billie Piper's Brona in the way that she dies. I thought it was kind of interesting that we have Ethan by her side at the beginning of the episode, knowing that she is about to die effectively, but he still walks out the door and goes off with Malcolm on their next expedition. He obviously knows he has to follow that expedition, but even that he would leave Brona on her deathbed. But he calls in Victor afterwards to try and help alleviate her pain at least. And as you say, John, Victor sends him away and realizes that Brona could be the perfect bride of Frankenstein. Now, there is a little problem with this plan of Victor's. I know he doesn't have an extremely large circle of friends, but
but one of them is Ethan, who is bound to recognize his former lover.
Yeah.
Yes.
Not the greatest of plans here.
No.
And I don't think Ethan would be majorly happy if not only
Probably
does he
not.
reanimate his girlfriend, the woman he loves, but he reanimates his girlfriend, the woman he loves, and passes her off to somebody else as well. I'm not too sure whether Victor's thought out this plan either.
What a wicked web Victor has spun for himself here.
I think he's very good at thinking, a couple of steps in the future, like 5 or 10 minutes. But what could happen if doesn't seem to be something that crosses Victor's mind very often. I also don't think Brona as a character is someone that's going to react very well to reanimation either.
Maybe not, but I do think that the pathway of Brona once she is reanimated is hugely interesting.
Mm-hmm.
It's not what you expect, ultimately.
Okay.
Yeah. For me, anyway. Well, this is a rewatch. It's not so much about trying to keep the spoilers down. I mean, I'm not going to go into it here, but
please don't, because I actually don't remember a lot of her stories. So, yeah.
The path she takes is fascinating. It empowers her, a bit like that empowerment of Caliban earlier on in the season, where he says, "I am the future. You are things of the past." She most definitely takes it and runs with it in an unexpected way, I think.
Right. Definitely no spoilers for that, because I'm looking forward to watching season 2 of the show again, because I haven't seen that one in quite a long time. Also, just to mention the closing of Ethan's story in this episode, or the opening, I suppose, of Ethan's story at the end of season 1, because we didn't know much about him. We knew his father had wanted him to come back to America. We saw some letters. We saw some mention of the fact that he was on the run. He was in hiding, and I suppose run away with the circus is kind of what he did as the gunslinger, traveling the world, doing these tricks around the world, and then left it to go into the employ of Malcolm. But we hadn't known much else about him. We see that actually Ethan's being hunted by the Pinkerton detectives from America to drag him back to the US if he doesn't go willingly. He'll play cards with him on the way back. He'll even let him win a couple of hands, but if he doesn't go willingly, they'll drag him back in chains. Yeah, they didn't plan for Ethan being a werewolf, did they?
No, not at all. I kind of like their two interactions in the bar. I think the first one, you get a sense, well, his daddy wants him home, so you're coming home. Yep. So his dad sounds like a very powerful man back in the US, but also that's just a good old kind of bar fight, of the Western variety, just at the Mariners Inn on the docks in London.
And in real life, that bar is the Stag's Head in Dublin.
Yes.
Where myself and John went out for a couple of pints with our mates about a week ago. So it was so interesting to see, because they didn't really redecorate the bar very much for the scene. The actual bar still looks very similar to that. Still the round tables against the wall, and still the bar where you order your beers from. But it's so interesting seeing it with nobody in it, because it's one of the busiest bars in Dublin.
Yeah, it's jammed, nights, absolutely.
So they must have filmed that at about 7:00 in the morning or something.
I would say so. It's jammed normally.
But it's a lovely bar. Go see it if you come to Dublin. Go to the Stag's Head, because you can see in the establishing shots for the next scene, you can see the Dane Tavern, which is the bar directly across the road from it, in that area of Dublin. It's just outside Temple Bar. If you've ever been to Dublin before, you'd probably recognise that area. But go see it. It's a lovely locals bar, but very busy.
Very busy. I like when they sort of catch up with him again, that he goes, "We'll chain you up like a monkey," and he goes, "There's no monkeys here." I just think it's a really nice line, as you see his knuckles crack as he grips the table, and he turns, his eyes are kind of that bright sort of yellowy green as he's turning into the werewolf. And blood against the window, always good, and it pans back, and there's that full moon over the Mariners Inn, which is really nice. And you see him dazed the next morning as well. So again,
like we had in episode 1, we had him dazed to begin with, and like in episode 3, I think it was as well, after another killing, we see him dazed waking up in the morning. So with nice little touches that those are connected back to then. Very tough job for any makeup artist, I guess, or costumer that has to do a werewolf, to make sure that it doesn't look like Teen Wolf. So always smart. And I think James Hall took the cue from that, where you make sure that they're only on screen for a millisecond or a few seconds. So it gives you the impression that there's a werewolf that looks like a man with a wolf's face, rather than having it on screen for a long period of time. So if we're going to see Ethan as werewolf often in the next season, I'm hopeful it's more wolf than man with wolf's face, because I just think it's a difficult thing to pull off without looking silly. So I can understand why they would hold it in the background for the whole season until this last moment. But he looks great. Like I think it's fine. It's not on screen long enough to have any kind of criticism of it. I think it looks absolutely fine on screen for the amount of time that it's on screen. But it's just one of those questions that's in my head going, yeah, but if that was a whole scene, or if people were talking to him for a minute, then it might look a bit off. So I'm glad they did it this way in the show. Yeah.
The thing is, what happened to the rest of the people having a quiet drink that night in the Mariners Inn? So
dead.
I presume, they're kind of slaughtered along with Mr. Kidd and Warren Roper, the two Pinkerton agents. So R.I.P. Mariners regulars. I think you are done and dusted. I think Vanessa also gets her ending as well, where she goes to church and has a conversation with the priest of that church. And it's where I kind of just wanted to say, there's a kind of contrast with the priest in episode 7 on the possession, where she says, "I believe in monsters, I believe in demons, I believe in the devil," which I think is one of the taglines of the show, actually. And he talks about an event in Wales where he came from with a child who had been possessed, and it destroyed the entire village. But ultimately, he looks back at her, and he reflects to her something that also Dorian Gray has said is, "Do you really want to be normal?" And she's not allowed to answer that as credits roll. The lips part, she is about to say something, but we don't know. And it's interesting as well that he's asking her the same question that Dorian Gray has also been saying.
Yeah, absolutely. I love these dispensing of stories from past, because usually you'd expect them to have a more uplifting ending than what happened to the child that you were trying to help from possession? No, he died. It's like, okay, not the most uplifting.
As did the rest of the village.
As did everybody else in the village, yeah. But yes, that's how season 1 of Penny Dreadful ends, with an open question for what we know definitely is a season 2, because we have the Blu-rays downstairs for more episodes of season 2. But I do wonder at the time, whether everybody knew there was going to be a second season of the show, because I think I mentioned in the first episode, one of the things I found fascinating rewatching Penny Dreadful again is how much you're expected as an audience to know about the characters that you may not know about. Not everybody knows about each individual character that was in Dracula or in Frankenstein or in Dorian Gray. Not everybody knows about all of those characters. So I think as the show had progressed, it felt like it was already a niche show. And by doing that, you create a niche within the niche for horror. So, so I was wondering whether this was a foregone conclusion that I was going to get a second season, but they've set up enough that it's going to be an interesting season to see what happens with these characters. And they have closed off the first season storyline about Malcolm getting his daughter back, where he has made the decision that actually his daughter is unsavable. So he's going to take her out instead of killing Vanessa to save his daughter or something like that. So any other notes about the episode that we haven't discussed, John?
I think the only one for me is the meeting of Dorian and Vanessa. Dorian really gets the cold shoulder from Vanessa at Malcolm Murray's, because she knows the events in his bedroom effectively opened her up to that second possession. And she comes to the botanical gardens so to end their relationship, which there's a nice motif of the orchid that you have seen earlier on in the season when they first met, which is alive and starting to bloom, is starting to die and wither. As is their intimacy and flowering relationship. And it's ultimately that Dorian, probably for the first time in his life, Vanessa says, you're experiencing rejection, as he leaves, and a dusty tear duct starts to reactivate in Dorian's eyes as he lets a solitary tear down his face, which is is amusing to him. He doesn't quite know what it is almost, but Vanessa in this moment is saying we have to keep our distance.
Yes. Well, he wanted every experience, and he wanted experiences that he'd never had before, and that's definitely an experience that Dorian Gray has not had, is rejection. So, so I love that, because it does feel like someone who's read the book Dorian Gray has gone, actually, this guy needs a little bit more comeuppance than he did within the book. What would be really good is if someone says, I don't want your affection, especially someone that he really finds a connection with. So, lovely touch by John Logan of how he incorporates Dorian Gray into this show, because Dorian's an atrocious human, as we've said before, so he deserves to have a bit of rejection as well. So.
The only other two bits are when the two Pinkerton agents meet Ethan in the bar for the first time. They make reference to cherry phosphate, which is kind of the precursor to cherry aid. So unless the phosphate makes it nicer and less tasting of artificial cherry, it's probably awful. And Ice Chip because presumably he's got a warm beer in the bar that they found him in, and in the US they are using this new ice chips or ice cubes, because obviously they in the past would have chipped off a much bigger block of ice. Just some nice little bits of terminology around old drinking.
Period thoughts. I like it. One other thing I just wanted to mention, just the Grand Guignol Theatre. I've mentioned before on the podcast, I'm a huge fan of Anne Rice and her vampire novels, the Vampire Chronicles. The Grand Guignol Theatre was an inspiration for quite a central moment in the Vampire Chronicles by Anne Rice, where they talked about the Theatre de Vampire in Paris, a theatre where vampires effectively performed plays on stage using some of their victims and kill them on stage in front of an audience. So another really creepy inspiration for art based around vampires, I suppose. So similar to this theatre in the show where the audience is reacting to the piles and piles of blood spurting out of the woman, who's in the play, but she's not killed, of Maud, who's in the play. She's not actually murdered on stage, whereas Anne Rice's twist on the Grand Guignol Theatre was it's actually run by vampires who are performing their art in front of an audience. So, nice little touches, but cool that there is a connection between the two there. That's the end of our thoughts about season 1 of Penny Dreadful, and episode 8 particularly, in this particular discussion. John, what do you think of the second half of season 1 of Penny Dreadful?
I thought this was amazing. I am definitely giving this 5 of cups out of 5.
Nice.
Yes, in reference to the tarot cards, which relates to sadness, loss, loneliness, despair, which I suppose at the time, if you didn't think there was going to be a season 2, you probably were feeling around the end of the series. But it's weird because my recollection of the second half of season 1, when I first watched it, was that it wasn't as good as the first part.
Right.
And that has totally changed and flipped on its head now.
Yeah.
I absolutely loved the second half of this. You have, in the possession episode, as much, if not more, of a tour de force than the seance in the performance of Eva Green. You have a flashback that is done so nicely and just layers the background of Mina, Malcolm, Vanessa, Peter, and they have real impact on episodes 6, 7, and 8. You have the big battles in the ship, moored at London docks, and in the Grand Guignol. You have all these different complex questions and motivations that really get nicely rounded out, and the realization, as we may have suspected anyway, that Ethan is a werewolf and is part of this supernatural grouping as well. So for me, absolutely loved it, and I'm so glad they decided to do a season 2, and I'm so glad we're going to rewatch season 2 as well, because I know for a fact there is one moment in season 2, at least, if I can call from my memory, that probably almost made me not want to keep watching. It was so frightening. In fact, there were two.
Oh, right. Excellent. Really looking forward to that.
Yes, and they involve dolls.
Oh, I see. Ooh,
Yuck.
Spoilers. Overall, on season 1, yeah, it was great to revisit this show. I do remember how much I loved the first season of the show. And it's interesting, isn't it, that how things are different when you look back on them now. You know, we as I mentioned on the episode, the flashback episode of 6, when I watched that, it just felt like a period drama, whereas the rest of the show, even though it's set in a Victorian setting, feels like a gothic horror. Yeah, there's two different things to me, and I made the distinction watching episode 6 going, maybe the show isn't for me because they've just done the thing I didn't want to watch. Oh, kids talking about who they're going to marry when they grow up. Oh, isn't this great? But when you go back and watch these episodes all in order, you can see how important doing that episode was. So I'm really glad we've gone back and watched this season, and I'm really looking forward to seeing season 2 and 3, because unlike you, John, I do remember season 1 of the show being great, and then I wasn't sure how I felt about season 2 and 3. So I'm really intrigued because I've forgotten a lot about season 2. So I'm looking forward to seeing what happens in season 2 and then what happens in season 3 as well, because I know they're very different stories than the first season.
Definitely. I think season 3 for me is the one that I can't recall in the same way as season 1 and season 2. Season 2 definitely takes a different turn, but it's still connected much more centrally to the group that we have. But it just introduces another supernatural element, which is fantastic.
Excellent. Excellent. We'll leave it there for our thoughts about Penny Dreadful. If you want to send us your thoughts, we'll give you a penny for your thoughts. Pop us in some feedback to feedback@tvpodcastindustries.com, or join us over in our Facebook group at facebook.com/groups/tvpodcastindustries. If you're not subscribed to the podcast, please go over to tvpodcastindustries.com, subscribe to the podcast over there, and you'll get each of our episodes as they come out on our main feed. You can also send us some voicemail if you want to hear your voice in the podcast. Go over there as well, tvpodcastindustries.com, and record up to 90 seconds of your thoughts. We love hearing from you about your thoughts. Even if you don't make it in time for an episode that we're discussing, we still love to hear your thoughts about what we're discussing on the show. As we've mentioned multiple times now, you're probably sick of hearing us say it, we do release these episodes of Penny Dreadful first over on our Patreon. So if you want to get them, the next ones first, might even be right now. We might have an episode up there that you haven't heard yet. Go on over to patreon.com/TV Podcast Industries and donate to us at any level, and you'll have access to any of the episodes that we have over there. Thank you so much for joining us for Penny Dreadful Season 1.
Yes, we will be continuing our rewatch of Penny Dreadful Season 2 on our Patreon account. And of course, over on our main feed on TV Podcast Industries, we are continuing our weekly look at the Star Trek Picard series in our podcast. And this Penny Dreadful rewatch is all linking up to the release of Penny Dreadful City of Angels on April 26th this year. But in the meantime, we are also continuing our weekly look at the Star Trek Picard series on our main feed. Please check on over there to listen to the podcast and our discussion of the Picard series.
Absolutely, yes. Thanks so much for joining us for our discussions about Penny Dreadful. It's been great going back there. Hope you're enjoying it as well.
As always, fellow Darklings, it's a pleasure chatting with you. Can't wait to come back and chat to you some more about Season 2 Penny Dreadful. But remember, keep watching, keep listening, and importantly, keep screaming. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.